I'm Ron Hollander again. I'm the Executive Director of the NET Research Foundation, the Neuroendocrine Tumor Research Foundation, a mouthful. And George Fisher, who you've met many times today, is the co-chair of our Board of Scientific Advisors. So we just wanted to spend a few minutes. You just heard some very exciting information about clinical trials underway. You heard about some breakthroughs earlier in the day. We want to tell you a little bit about what's ahead in terms of how we do what we do to make sure that what's still elusive, what is it that makes these tumors form in the first place? What makes them grow? What are the indicators on the tumors that are going to inform clinical trials or other interventions that are going to be lasting and ultimately cure? How do we get these tumors to stop forming in the first place or make them disappear? And that really goes to the core of our mission. We are a 501c3 foundation. We are funded exclusively by donations from individuals like you, nonprofit foundations. We get some money from pharma, but not for the research, but to help us do education programs and things of this nature. We were, for those of you who've been around for a while, formerly known as the Caring for Carcinoid Foundation. Our mission is very singular. It's to fund research to discover cures and more effective treatments for neuroendocrine cancers of all types. The origin was originally in terms of carcinoid and pancreatic, and we broadened that, as George will tell you a little bit more about. We have a singular focus, but we have many, many partners. I've talked with many of you today. Are you guys in Boston? Yeah, there are 4 or 5 of us in small offices in Boston, and the research is all over the US and pretty soon all over the world. So we look to find the best labs, the best researchers, the best ideas that are really going to get us towards our goal. As I said, all of our funding is private. It comes from family foundations, and we'll talk about one in particular in a moment, as well as bequests, charitable gifts. There are people in this audience who have given in all of those various iterations, and thank you, thank you, thank you. And we really follow from our origins a roadmap for research that says, at some level, you got to figure out what makes these tumors tick at the very basic genetic and biologic level if you're ever going to solve the riddle of how to get rid of them. So that's who we are. We're going to do this back and forth a little bit. I'll turn it over to George to talk a little bit about how we do it.
So I'm just going to abbreviate the process a little bit. We decided early on to cast a broad net. So we will give grants through the American Association of Cancer Research. That's an international organization where there are researchers all over the world that can apply for those grants. And we may ask for grants specifically for pancreatic neuroendocrine or for midgut carcinoid or for different types of modalities applied to that. We also have been frustrated that we don't have a good in vitro or mouse model for pancreatic neuroendocrine tumors. And so we actually set up a prize. We said, okay, the first lab that comes up with a mouse model gets $250,000. Well, that's a lot of money to a lab. And so that's gotten a lot of interest, and so a lot of labs are working on that, trying to win the prize. We also have engaged all the top neuroendocrine tumor centers throughout the US and also now starting in Europe to participate in these awards. I will say that we award grants through a process through a board of scientific advisors, so we have a peer review with experts on that board that then decide where the money goes. So I think that the money is well invested and generally invested in the high-level projects. If you want to introduce Peterson.
So this is how we've been set up from the beginning in 2005. And in 2016, or really end of 15, when we were sitting in this program just up the road almost exactly a year ago, we were just about to announce a major gift from the Peterson Foundation in Los Angeles, a family whose fortune was built on automotive magazine publishing. That gave us a $15 million gift over the 3 years of the grant. Thank you.
And I only took 10%, honest.
It was a team effort to get it, and you know what they were most impressed with was what George just said. You know, they were looking around for one place they could place a big bet on neuroendocrine because the head of the family had lost his battle with neuroendocrine actually almost 10 years earlier. And they came to us saying, which is the center we should give all our money to? And we said, well, listen, there are a lot of really great researchers all over the world, Don't you want to give it to the best people with the best ideas in each of the relevant areas and disciplines? And we've got a model, which George had described to you, that can do just that. And they had never funded that much money on an organization as small as us, but on your behalf, we were so thrilled, and our board, which is entirely made up of patients and family members of patients, couldn't have been more thrilled. So what we did, and most of what we're going to talk about now, is where we go with these monies and what happens when those monies run out. So there are 4 areas that we proposed, because this was the multi-pronged attack that we thought could really make a difference. And those 4 areas, we'll get into each one individually, is first what I said before. If we can't crack the code of the biology of these tumors, we're never going to find a lasting way to stop them from forming in the first place and control them ultimately and find cures. So that's number 1. Number 2, targeted therapies, the kinds of things you've been hearing, the ever-present search for what is it that we can find in our tumors that can be actionable, if you will, that we have a drug we can go after, or immunotherapy, or something else that can really target specifically neuroendocrine tumors. We'll talk about that. The Petersons were very interested in making sure the momentum continued. So how can we continue to bring more and more of the best researchers into our quest, into our mission to finally defeat and cure these tumors? So more young investigators and attracting really top-level investigators from other related fields, cancer research, other areas of research, to enlist them in our quest. And then finally, providing the kind of information through these kinds of programs and through other tools that can really help support patients, families on the journey. So that's the 4-pronged effort. The first one, of course, was cracking the code of biology, and I'll let George talk about that.
Yeah, and I'm only going to touch on it briefly. We'll touch a little bit more in the next 2 talks, actually, but we've having that big a gift means great responsibility on us as an organization to make sure that we put it to the best use, and after a couple of years, we can have a return on that investment. And so we've decided to invest the first round of accelerator grants. These are large, over $1 million grants meant to attract the top labs in the country who can collaborate with other labs around the world, and then bring their project to fruition in a short time frame. So we have projects where we're going to do a comprehensive analysis of the genome, the epigenome, look at a number of tumors and all the molecular ways that we know how right now to try to figure out, is there a molecular vulnerability in these tumors that we've not been able to find until now? So this is going to be the most comprehensive approach ever taken to these tumors. The second approach is to understand the basic biology, and a colleague at Harvard has done some studies on some mice, have identified potentially the stem cell for carcinoid tumors, the original normal cell that can give rise to carcinoid tumors. And he's got a way now of manipulating that genetically. And so we think that by investing in that particular technology, we may be able to start to understand for the first time how carcinoid tumors develop. Another approach is to try to develop that mouse model that we don't have for the tumors. That's a mouse model of how a tumor develops. How about a mouse model for the actual tumors and how they grow? And so we've engaged a world-famous scientist from the Netherlands to work on organoids, to try to develop specific little tumorlets, if you will, that can grow in the laboratory. And if we can get those to grow in the laboratory, then we can manipulate them genetically and do some of these tests that we haven't been able to do till now. So these are the accelerator grants. They're big grants. They're intended to be transformative in the field, and that's just the first round. We will have another round next year that we intend to put more towards a translational bent, meaning towards a bench to bedside, where we're actually involving ourselves with clinical trials or with the biological aspects of clinical trials, trying to reach, again, from the basic science to the patient care.
So let me pick this up, and just on the accelerators too, you saw on the top of that bigger engines to drive faster progress. That was an appeal directly to the automotive publishing. But basically what we're saying here is we want dedicated teams really working together, and what we do once a year, and we'll do in a couple of months, bring those teams together, share their data, learn from each other to really accelerate the progress, not only in their individual labs, but also collectively on behalf of our community. So the second big piece is developing that strong bench. And without getting into all the details here, we made commitments, and it's so wonderful, I have to tell you again and again, to watch the collaboration on this stage, and now the collaboration between our organization and the leading North American Neuroendocrine Tumor Society, the Society for Nuclear Medicine, the International Neuroendocrine Cancer Alliance that I'm the president of this year. We've engaged each one of them in special projects, either for a new pilot investigator in terms of applying some of the things you heard from Tom Hope, who actually happens to be the first recipient of that award. Looking at some of the things he said are yet to come. Well, it's yet to come right in a neighborhood near yours. We're also working very closely with the North American Neuroendocrine Tumor Society to sponsor a basic translational investigator. So that's the first time we've done that. We've already committed to doing that again. Another way of bringing more researchers to the cause. And then finally, we're working with physicians like George, the European Neuroendocrine Tumor Society, to look at unmet needs with patient groups all over the world, the 20 countries that are represented by the International Neuroendocrine Cancer Alliance, INCA. So that's where the collaborations to build that strong bench come in. And the next slide is about targeted therapies.
Yeah, so I'll just touch briefly. So besides investing in the basic science of the disease and trying to have a better understanding of the molecular underpinnings that define the disease, we're actually also looking at new therapies. And so we've taken a chance and invested in the JR11, which Tom briefly alluded to. It's a new form of PRRT that could conceivably be better than the soon-to-be approved form of PRRT. So we're hoping to continue to advance that field. We're looking at the possibility of developing a clinical trials incubator where we could have multiple clinical trials come through with a greater efficiency than we currently have right now. Emily and Pam and I work closely together with UCSF and Stanford, and Emily showed you many of the trials that we share in, but it's sort of an onerous process getting that through pharmaceutical companies and getting it through the NCI. And if we could develop a quicker way to get it through, we might have some more patient throughput, better accrual. We've also talked about a translational reserve fund. So the idea that if there's a large clinical trial being done, but the NCI doesn't have money to process the blood or do certain studies that we might think are important, we could combine forces with the NCI or even with a company and say, well, we're interested in these questions that could be answered by that trial. Let's go ahead and work together. So we're looking at different opportunities to use these resources to make what clinical research is out there even stronger, add science to it. And then the immunotherapy, which many people, I have the stack of cards, many people ask about immunotherapy, I'm not surprised, is sort of something that's taking place in all of oncology. And we want to make sure that we raise neuroendocrine tumors to visibility within the drug companies that have immunotherapy drugs, but also to understand the science behind it and how can we make the immune system recognize neuroendocrine tumors. So we have a number of efforts. We have an effort through University of Pennsylvania trying to see if we can train T cells. These are the cells that are capable of killing tumor cells. These are immune cells. If we could train them in the laboratory to go ahead and kill neuroendocrine tumors in the laboratory. We're looking at trying to understand what immune cells are actually in the tumor now, and can we take advantage of what cells there? And if the right cells are not there, how do we get them there? And again, right now it's still a process of a better understanding. And we hope soon to actually have the clinical trials. Emily mentioned one of her trials will be using a drug that's approved for 4 or 5 different cancers already. She'll be the first to test it in poorly differentiated neuroendocrine tumors, which, although rare, it's an important step forward in trying to see whether these drugs can come and help the neuroendocrine tumor population as a whole.
So we're going to sum it up now and then go into the genetic piece, but let me just say, I wish you could all witness the process that George and his colleagues go through. These are some of the best scientists literally in the world, looking at, with energy and such commitment, what it is we can do in selecting these projects that now proposals coming from all over the world. We've got such a robust international response to our accelerator proposals, and it's much more than the amounts of money. It's the requirements we put on them also to share data and to make sure that they have transformative ideas. We have those great relationships with the the Neuroendocrine Society in North America, with the Nuclear Medicine Society, with the international groups. They're all coming to the cause together. And we've done all this, and I want to say thank you again to all of you who have made it possible to get here with your generosity. Now with the Peterson Foundation, we've got 2 years of some very significant funding. We're putting it to very, very strong and aggressive use with the help of George and his colleagues. We're also going to be announcing shortly that we're mounting a challenge to continue that level of intensity so we don't slow down when those funds run out. And at this stage, a couple of years ago, we announced the challenge grant, which we'll be announcing once again to encourage as many of you and your colleagues and neighbors everywhere to help us make sure that we get to the finish line at this new level of intensity and research and progress. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to George to pick up with genetics, and we're going to keep going, and we'll take a break, but we're probably going to take a slightly shorter break after the genetics portion. Right? Thank you.